She slid an envelope across the table like it was a checkmate, not a challenge. The roast had gone cold. Margaret sat at the head of the table, hands folded neatly in her lap, eyes scanning the remains of the dinner she'd spent most of Sunday preparing. Rosemary chicken, scalloped potatoes, a salad even the grandkids used to like before they stopped coming. Ryan sat to her left, his fork moving aimlessly across his plate. Vanessa perched across from him, one elbow propped, like she owned the furniture, not borrowed it twice last year, when they moved. The air was taut, not loud, worse, condescending. Margaret had noticed it creeping in over the past year. The sudden corrections, the subtle sneers, the way Vanessa never used her name, just she or your mother. But tonight, Vanessa hadn't bothered with subtlety. She'd sat through the first course with her phone screen tilted just enough to be rude, offered dry compliments. The chicken's not as tough this time, and didn't once touch the wine Margaret had bought, especially. Now dessert plates sat scraped clean, forks resting like white flags, and Margaret was about to stand when Vanessa reached into her purse. She pulled out a white envelope, the kind with thickness, intent, not a thank you card. She slid it across the table with 2 fingers, her smile tight, since you're too stupid to notice. Ryan inhaled sharply, but didn't speak, didn't even meet Margaret's eyes. Margaret looked at the envelope, then at her son. His shoulders were hunched like he was bracing for weather he couldn't name. Vanessa leaned back, lips curled in satisfaction. Margaret picked up the envelope and peeled it open, slow and precise. Inside, a stapled packet of typed pages. The title read, Financial Tally of Unreciprocated Support. Below it, itemized debts, groceries bought on shared vacations, utilities paid during their first year of marriage when they lived in Margaret's guest house, emotional burdens incurred, and a line labeled spatial overreach, constant boundary violations. Margaret flipped the page. There were 3 more. At the bottom in bold, you are no longer welcome to drop by without permission. Your presence causes tension. We are no longer pretending to be a family unit. Vanessa tilted her head. Now maybe you'll stop acting like you matter here. Margaret didn't respond. She closed the packet slowly, set it beside her plate, and stood. The dining room chair let out the softest squeak. Vanessa rolled her eyes. What? No denial, no gasp, no pitiful tears to milk sympathy from your son? Ryan opened his mouth, closed it again. Margaret's voice was even. Excuse me. She turned and walked down the hall, past the hallway of family photos, some already missing, frames empty, where Vanessa had quietly removed them for updates, past the linen closet, past the room where Ryan used to build pillow forts. She entered her bedroom, lit by soft lamp glow, tidy and quiet. She knelt beside the cedar chest at the foot of her bed, lifted the lid. She knew what she was looking for, had placed it there months ago, though she hadn't planned to use it. Not yet, but Vanessa had set the match. Margaret reached inside and removed a thick manila envelope, not labeled, but heavy. She stood, spine straightening inch by inch, then walked back toward the dining room. Her slippers barely made a sound against the hardwood. Vanessa was still mid-eye roll when Margaret returned. Without a word, she crossed the room and placed her own envelope beside Vanessa's half-eaten slice of cake. Not a sound, not a smile, just paper and silence. Vanessa's fingers twitched. Ryan looked up. Margaret folded her hands, finally speaking. Now we're even. She returns with an envelope of her own. I didn't raise my voice. I just raised the stakes. Vanessa stared at the envelope like it had teeth. Not a flicker of curiosity, just calculation. Her fingers drummed the edge of her plate, soft rhythmic taps, each one angrier than the last. She didn't look at Margaret. Not yet. The air had thickened, dense and humid, like the storm hadn't broken yet, but had certainly arrived. Ryan sat frozen, his fork resting in a pool of forgotten sauce. The muscles in his jaw tightened, then relaxed, then tightened again. His eyes flicked between the envelope and his mother's face, as though hoping one might blink first. Margaret didn't move, didn't blink, didn't soften. She simply stood there, her hands folded in front of her like someone delivering communion or consequence. Finally, Vanessa snatched the envelope and tore it open with a kind of theatrical disgust, as if the very paper offended her fingers. She pulled out the letter inside, a thick sheet with a crisp header and legal weight. Her eyes darted across the page, faster then slower. Then they stopped. Her lips parted. She blinked. "You," she began, but the words choked. "You had this notarized." Margaret's voice was soft. Too soft. "Last Wednesday." Vanessa's mouth opened again, but no words came. She looked at Ryan, then back at the page in her hand. "You're cutting us out?" Her voice pitched higher, losing the silky cruelty it had worn all evening. "From everything?" Margaret gave the smallest nod. "Everything with my name on it." Vanessa stood slowly, the letter trembling in her hand. "This is financial abuse," she said, each word sharp with outrage. Margaret tilted her head slightly. "No, this is a boundary, something you mistook for cruelty because it finally protected me." Ryan inhaled, chest heavy, hands clutched between his knees. "Mom, please." "No," Margaret said. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It was steady the way anchors are steady, immovable beneath the surface. "You let her speak for both of you. Let her speak over me, around me, about me. And you said nothing." Vanessa scoffed. "You think this makes you powerful." "No," Margaret replied, taking a step toward the table. "It makes me free." The chandelier above the dining table hummed faintly, catching the silence that had now grown too large for the room. Vanessa slammed the letter down. "You're petty. You're jealous. You're sick." Margaret took the insult like mist on glass, seen but easily wiped away. "You're upset because I gave you what you wanted." Vanessa blinked. "What the hell are you talking about? You said I was irrelevant, unwanted, intrusive. Now I am, officially." Ryan stood abruptly. "Can I talk to you?" he asked, voice hoarse. "Alone?" Margaret shook her head gently. "I'm not giving you privacy for a conversation you should have had publicly when I was being humiliated over dessert." His shoulders sagged. "This isn't fair," he said. "It's not meant to be fair," Margaret said. "It's meant to be final." Vanessa grabbed her purse, still fuming. "You think this is over? You think that envelope ends something?" She turned to the door, half laughing, half burning. "We'll see who ends the—" She stalked out, heels clacking like gavel strikes on tile. Ryan stood for a long moment, before following her. At the door he turned. "You didn't have to." "I did," Margaret said, "because no one else ever would." And then he was gone too. Margaret stood alone in the dining room. The roast had gone cold. Again, but she didn't care. She cleared the plates one by one, slowly, carefully, like someone wiping away a past that no longer had teeth. Vanessa says, "We'll see who ends the—" They left their plates, their coats and their masks. Margaret didn't rush. She stood there for a moment, after the door closed, watching the air settle where Ryan and Vanessa had been. The room felt oddly bigger now. Not better, not worse, just unmatched. The roast still sat untouched, juices congealing on a plate. Ryan never really touched. Vanessa's fork was upside down on the linen napkin, like a statement. Her chair was still slightly pushed out. Margaret reached for the dishes, one by one. No clatter, no muttering, just the soft scrape of ceramic and the low hum of the dishwasher. As she loaded it, her hands moved automatically, stack, rinse, place, as her mind circled the evening like a hawk. But she didn't replay what she'd said. She didn't question the envelope. She just kept seeing Ryan's eyes, when he realized she meant it. By the time the table was cleared, the last of the wine had warmed in the bottle. Margaret poured herself half a glass, and walked to the sink. She stared out into the dark yard, where the porch light lit up nothing but moths and memory. Then she reached for her phone. "Hey Ellen, it's done," she said into the voicemail. "The delivery went through. They have the documents now." She didn't elaborate, didn't need to. She ended the call, and set the phone face down. 10 minutes later, there was a knock on the back door. Margaret opened it to find Helen holding a bottle of red and a smile that had seen a few wars. "You finally did it," Helen said, stepping into the kitchen like she belonged there. "Thought I'd bring something stronger than decaf for the occasion." They settled into the sunroom. where the overhead fan spun slowly, and the cushions still smelled faintly of lemon furniture polish. Margaret poured 2 glasses. I thought I'd feel guiltier. Helen clinked hers lightly. Guilt is what happens when you do something wrong. You didn't. Margaret nodded, then paused. Do you remember my niece Charlotte? Helen blinked. The one who stopped calling after Christmas 2 years ago. Margaret handed her the phone. Screenshots. Dozen. Each one a message thread. Between Vanessa and Charlotte. Snide jabs. Concerned inquiries. Manipulative complaints. Margaret's name twisted into warnings. Pity. Punchlines. She's losing it. Thinks she still matters in our life. Don't worry. Once the will's ours, she'll have nothing left to nag about. Helen scrolled slowly, her face stiffening. Margaret waited. When Helen finally looked up, her voice was low and fierce. You're not crazy. You're just surrounded by snakes. Margaret exhaled through her nose. I kept thinking maybe I was too sensitive, too strict, too old-fashioned, but they weren't confused. They were coordinated. She took a sip of wine. It's a strange thing, she said softly. Realizing your absence is more valuable to some people than your presence ever was. Helen reached over and squeezed her hand. They sat like that for a long while, not talking, just letting silence fill the places where doubt used to live. Eventually Helen left with a promise to call in the morning, and a second bottle tucked under her arm. Margaret returned to the kitchen, turning off lights one by one. In the quiet she tapped her phone. Notifications. One in particular caught her eye. Vanessa. An Instagram story. Margaret clicked. The screen lit up with a filtered photo of a half-full wine glass, and the words overlaid in elegant cursive. Narcissists. Love estate drama. Underneath, some of us break cycles. Some just hoard inheritance. Margaret stared, then turned the phone off, and set it face down again. She didn't sigh, didn't shake her head. She just walked slowly down the hall, and locked her bedroom door with a click that sounded a lot like peace. Vanessa posts online. Narcissists. Love estate drama. She didn't post my name, but she didn't have to. The post gained traction before breakfast. By 9 a.m. Margaret's phone buzzed with polite confusion disguised as concern. A message from her cousin June. Saw something strange online. Everything okay with Ryan? Another from a former neighbor. So sorry to hear about the Tench families. Huh. No one asked for her version. No one offered to listen. They just tiptoed around the assumption that the louder story must be the truer one. Margaret sipped her coffee slowly. Bitter. Strong. Vanessa hadn't tagged her, of course. That would have been too obvious. Instead, she'd weaponized implication, vague captions, curated grief, phrases designed to stick like gum under someone's reputation. Some women confuse control with care. I tried everything, but some people just want power, not peace. Each one layered over aesthetic photos of a half-eaten dinner, dim lighting, and a profile shot of Ryan looking tragically misunderstood. Margaret didn't respond. She just read, then reread, then saved every post, every comment, every timestamp. By lunchtime the story had more. Margaret was being painted as a meddling matriarch who'd lost touch, lashed out and lashed back. A private decision, her will, her home, was being reframed as a public betrayal. She stared at her screen, then opened her laptop and created a new folder. She named it Truth, Unedited. Inside she dropped everything, screenshots, voicemail recordings, even receipts from the dinner. She typed notes, dated them, marked context. She wasn't defending herself. She was preserving history before someone else rewrote it. At 2:47 p.m. her phone lit up with a new name. Alec, her other son. The one who lived across the state, quieter, kinder. He hadn't picked sides, hadn't needed to. What's going on with Ryan? His message read. Margaret stared at the words a long moment, then typed back, he's being spoken for by someone who's rewriting me. No reply, but the read notification blinked. That evening, Helen returned, this time with shortbread cookies and less ceremony. They're escalating, Margaret said, handing her the phone. Helen scrolled, they want you to play the villain. I won't, Margaret said. This isn't a feud, it's a performance. I just won't be the audience anymore. They sat quietly. The air smelled of lemon balm and peppermint oil, Margaret's new diffuser humming softly in the background. Helen asked, have you called your lawyer again? Margaret nodded. This morning, he confirmed. Vanessa's still listed as having power of attorney from when Ryan had surgery and we thought it might be helpful. I'm revoking it tomorrow. Helen blinked. She still has access. Margaret didn't answer. She didn't have to. After Helen left, Margaret returned to her document folder. She added new screenshots, then opened her email. One unread notification caught her eye. Subject line: eligibility approved. Caregiver reimbursement authorization. She froze. The email was from the State Elder Services Office. Approved under her name. A stipend for full-time caregiving, filed by someone named Vanessa Morgan. Authorized family. Claimed hours 47 per week. Margaret's hands went cold. She clicked the PDF. Vanessa's signature. Her own name. Margaret Roth. Written. Like a stamp. Like she'd volunteered. She blinked. Then sat back. The room didn't spin. It narrowed. Everything, the slow undermining, the public smears, the emotional labor invoices, they weren't just bitterness. They were groundwork. Financial, legal, reputation. Margaret stood slowly, as if moving too fast might crack something in her chest. She picked up her phone, scrolled to her lawyer's number, then paused. Instead, she tapped out a different number. The State Fraud Reporting Hotline. She cleared her throat. When the voice answered on the other end, polite and clipped, Margaret spoke clearly. I need to file a report. Her voice didn't shake. Not once. Margaret picks up the phone. I need to file a report. If she treated me like a paycheck, I'd treat her like a case file. Margaret didn't go alone. She met Helen in the municipal parking lot just after 10. The sun was high but pale, and Margaret wore her wool coat like armor, even though it was too warm for it. Helen brought coffee, 2 pens and a leather folder full of results. They walked in step through the glass doors of the county courthouse, past the security scanner, up to the second floor where her lawyer's office waited. Inside, the walls were lined with framed degrees and soft jazz played faintly through hidden speakers. Patrick, her attorney, rose from his desk, with a nod that didn't bother pretending this was routine. You're sure? He asked as they sat. Margaret didn't flinch. I've been sure for years. I just finally have proof. Helen placed the folder on the desk. Digital and printed copy, screenshots, dates, the state filing, and the payout record. Patrick opened the folder slowly. His eyes moved quickly, stopping on the forged caregiver request. This is fraud, he said plainly, filed under your name without consent. They even claimed retroactive hours. Margaret gave a single nod. She wasn't taking care of me. She was collecting on the lie. He slid a form across the desk. We'll start here. Revocation of power of attorney. We'll get it notarized this morning. Then I'll contact Elder Protective Services and submit your documentation. Margaret took the pen, signed, date, initial, again. The weight lifted, a page at a time. By noon, it was official. Vanessa no longer had access to Margaret's accounts, her files, her medical documents, nothing. What once had been offered in good faith was now legally dead. The Elder Protection Office moved quickly. A formal case file was opened by end of day. Margaret received confirmation by email at 4:03 p.m. Subject line: fraud allegation done 4892. Morgan, Vanessa. She didn't forward it, didn't need to. Helen sat across from her at the kitchen table, reading the response with calm satisfaction. Your son still thinks this is about dinner, she said. He doesn't realize it's about restitution. Margaret lifted her phone, showing her latest message from Ryan. Can you stop escalating this? You've humiliated Vanessa. What are you trying to prove? She typed a reply. Slowly, deliberately. I documented everything. Then pressed send. Helen chuckled without humor. This isn't personal drama anymore. It's ledger accuracy. Margaret didn't smile. Instead, she stood, walked to her hallway cabinet, and removed a slim white envelope. What's that? Helen asked. The cease and desist. Helen blinked. You're really doing it. She's made public statements, Margaret said. Implied I'm mentally unstable. That's not gossip. That's defamation. They returned to Patrick's office the next day, signed the paperwork, sent it by courier. No drama, just legal ink. When Margaret arrived home that evening, dusk had already begun to settle over the porch. The mailbox leaned slightly, a relic from better years. She reached inside, a single envelope, legal stationery. She knew before opening it. Vanessa filed through a third-party attorney in bold, officious typeface. Petition for damages related to elder abuse and financial retaliation. Margaret stared at it, didn't move, her jaw clenched slowly, not with panic, but precision. She stepped inside, set the envelope on her kitchen table, and poured a glass of water. Then she sat and read, line by line, false claims of manipulation. Claims that Margaret had coerced Ryan, sabotaged their marriage, created a hostile familial environment. Vanessa accused her of withholding inheritance in revenge for perceived slights. It wasn't just desperate, it was tactical. Vanessa was flipping the script, trying to paint herself as the victim of elder abuse. Margaret folded the letter, took one long sip of water, then reached for her laptop. She opened the folder marked Truth Unedited, clicked the subfolder, Fraud Caregiver Stipend, then opened a blank Word document, title, Response, Filing Draft. She cracked her knuckles once, then began typing. Margaret arrives home and finds a legal notice in the mail. Vanessa is suing. She sued me for protecting myself. The summons came in a plain envelope. No drama, no flourish, just law in black serif, folded twice. Margaret unfolded it at her kitchen table, morning light cutting across the worn wood. The headline was sterile, Petition for Civil Damages, but the subtext was a scream. Vanessa had filed a lawsuit, claiming emotional distress, exclusionary elder abuse, and retaliatory inheritance manipulation. In short, Margaret was being sued for drawing a boundary. She read the first page 3 times, then set it down beside her tea. The steam curled upward like a question mark. Helen arrived minutes later, sliding off her coat and leaning over the document. She's suing you for what she did to you. Margaret didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her silence had started to carry weight lately. By noon, Margaret sat across from Mark, her lawyer, who wore glasses thick enough to reflect every word before he said it. It's an intimidation tactic, he said simply, tapping the paper. The goal isn't to win, it's to drain you. Emotionally, legally, publicly. Margaret nodded once. Then let's stay filled. Mark smiled at the steel in her voice, but the news kept circling. Ryan refused to meet. He replied to Margaret's message with 6 words. Please stop making this harder, Mom. No questions, no defense, no invitation to talk. Mark offered mediation as a way to defuse the suit. Vanessa accepted, but on one condition, that it take place in Margaret's home. She wants home court advantage, Helen muttered when Margaret relayed the request. Let her try, Margaret said, but we'll own the game. The day before mediation, Helen returned with a discreet set of audio recorders, the kind journalists use when sources get slippery. We record, she said, start to finish, with timestamp logs and backups. Margaret didn't argue. The kitchen was staged as neutral, teacups out, folders prepped, a pitcher of water, nothing too warm, nothing too welcoming. When Vanessa arrived, she looked around with practiced disdain. You're still living like a hostage, she said, running a finger along the window ledge. Don't worry, we'll settle this. Margaret didn't flinch. I'm not settling anything. I'm clarifying. The mediator arrived minutes later, a middle-aged woman with neutral tones and eyes that had seen too much family war to be surprised anymore. She laid out the agenda. Vanessa interrupted. Repeatedly, I was excluded from her will without notice. I was treated like help, like it's financial abuse. Margaret didn't react. She just slid over a printed email with the forged caregiver application. The mediator blinked, read, then looked up. That's your signature, Mrs. Morgan? Vanessa's jaw tightened. It was authorized. No, Margaret said calmly. It was stolen. The tension built slowly, not explosive, but dense. The kind of thick that sinks into floorboards and memories. Vanessa made jabs, accused Margaret of dramatizing normal family disagreements, called her paranoid, called her manipulative, called her vindictive. Margaret never raised her voice, never leaned forward. just spoke when asked and watched everything else land in the record. By the time the mediator wrapped the session, no progress had been made. Vanessa stood. This won't end in this house. No, Margaret said. It started here, but I'll end it somewhere else. That night, rain tapped lightly against the windows like a reminder. Some storms come quiet. Margaret washed her hands slowly at the sink. Tea cooled beside her. Her phone buzzed on the counter. A message from Mark. Vanessa brought an unexpected guest. Margaret dried her hands with precision. Picked up the phone. Read it again. She typed back, "Who?" The reply came a moment later. "David Morgan, your ex-husband." Margaret didn't gasp. She just stared at the screen, lips pressed flat, and whispered, "Of course." Mark texts Margaret midnight. "Vanessa brought an unexpected guest. She walked into my home like she owned it, and I let her show me how wrong she was." Vanessa's heels clicked down the hall before her voice did. "Let's keep this productive," she said, setting her tote down like a gavel. Her lawyer followed, younger than expected, briefcase already unlatched. Margaret didn't stand. She remained seated in the armchair near the sunlit window, a tray of untouched tea between them. Calm, composed, back straight, the way women sit when they've survived worse than lawsuits. The mediator, Mrs. Lang, arrived precisely at 10, neutral tones, clipboard in hand. "Thank you all for agreeing to host this in a familiar setting," she began. "Our goal is to create space for resolution, not escalation." Vanessa was already talking. "In the interest of transparency, I'd like to state that I've been emotionally disregarded, unfairly excluded from estate matters I was once part of, and spoken to like an intruder in this family." Ryan sat stiffly near the hallway door, his phone face down on his knee, jaw clenched. Margaret said nothing. Mrs. Lang gently turned to her. "Ms. Roth, do you have a response?" Margaret reached slowly into the drawer of the small writing desk beside her. She produced a small digital recorder, clicked play. Vanessa's voice spilled into the room, sharp, triumphant, unaware she was being preserved in real time. "She's a bitter old woman, and once that will's in ink, we'll ship her off with a casserole and a fake smile. I'm not spending another year pretending she's anything but dead weight." Ryan's head turned. Fast. The color drained from his face. Vanessa surged forward. "That's out of context." Margaret stopped the playback. "The context is my bedroom, 10 feet from where you laughed." Miss Lang blinked, then cleared her throat. "Let's take a brief recess." Vanessa's lawyer looked shell-shocked. "We'll reconvene in 15. Everyone dispersed. Margaret didn't. She stood, moved through the hall toward her room, more to breathe than to break. But the door was ajar. She stepped inside. Vanessa stood at her nightstand drawer, fingers wrapped around a stack of envelopes. Her back went rigid. Margaret didn't raise her voice. She simply said, "Those are personal." Vanessa turned, slow and unapologetic. "You said this wasn't war, but you brought weapons." Margaret stepped aside. "Then don't be surprised there are consequences." She walked back to the living room, calm, slow, found the mediator by the front window, flipping through notes. "Mrs. Lang," Margaret said quietly, "you'll want to note this. I just found Morgan rifling through my bedroom drawers during recess." Mrs. Lang looked up, startled. "Did she remove anything?" "She was holding private mail. I asked her to stop." "She did not apologize." The mediator's mouth tightened. "That's grounds for eviction from the mediation." "Possibly more." Margaret simply nodded. "I've already documented it." Mrs. Lang set her notes down, then reached for her phone. The room didn't shake. It clarified. The mediator steps away and says quietly, "That's grounds for eviction. You snooped in my private drawer. Now I'm closing the door on this farce." The lock clicked behind Vanessa like punctuation. Margaret stood at the door for a full minute after she left, hands still, expression composed, before gently turning the deadbolt. Inside, the house exhaled. The tension had left claw marks on the air, but even air can recover. The next morning, Margaret walked into City Hall with her coat buttoned to the top, and the envelope clutched under one arm. She didn't tremble. She didn't even clear her throat. At the front desk, She asked for the forms by name, trespassing complaint, civil, with supporting documentation. An hour later, her name was on record, and so was Vanessa's. That afternoon, a locksmith replaced every keyhole in the house. 2 deadbolts. 1 smart lock. Helen handled the installation of the exterior cameras, 1 above the porch, 1 by the garage, and a 3rd tucked discreetly beneath the eave by the back gate. Vanessa called it paranoid theatrics. In a group chat, Margaret was still a part of. The message popped up beside a photo of her manicured hand holding a wine glass. This is what happens when people mistake attention for affection. The caption read. Margaret didn't reply. She archived the thread. Helen tested the camera feed from her laptop. Backed up to cloud storage. Motion activated. Password protected. This house is now harder to breach than a governor's mansion. Margaret gave a small nod. Good. She sat at the kitchen table, sorting paperwork with gloved precision. The cease and desist was logged. The fraud report updated. The recorder files indexed and dated. She didn't raise her voice. She raised her standard. 2 days later, Vanessa's lawyer formally withdrew from mediation, citing client non-compliance and breach of neutral territory expectations. The notice landed in Margaret's inbox like a white flag in legalese. Helen raised an eyebrow when she saw it. Translation, she asked. They know she's a liability. Margaret said, sipping her tea. But they don't want the smoke she brings either. Mrs. Lang, the mediator sent a follow-up request. Do you wish to proceed with independent review? Margaret clicked reply. Attached 3 audio files. A summary document. The incident report. Time-stamped camera footage. Then typed 2 words. Yes. Proceed. She hit send. The house was quiet that evening. A soft wind stirred the branches out front. Helen sat beside her on the sunroom loveseat, knitting a scarf in slow rhythm, while Margaret filed copies into her safe. Do you feel better? Helen asked. No, Margaret said, not unkindly, but I feel finished. The doorbell rang once, then silence. Helen peeked through the peephole. No one, just a package on the mat. A flat envelope with no return label. Inside a printout. A screenshot from social media. A new post, from a page managed by someone named Morgan Family Truth. It was a blog now, glossy headers, testimonials, phrases like estranged matriarch, and emotional elder instability. Margaret read it once, then folded it cleanly and dropped it into the shredder without ceremony. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Mark, a text was short, clipped. They've hired a PR firm. They're playing hardball publicly. Margaret exhaled slowly, then said aloud, mostly to herself, good, because now it was no longer just about them. Now it was a record, and records, she knew how to keep. Mark says, they've hired a PR firm. They're playing hardball publicly. She tweets about my cruelty. I post about her crimes. The tweet went up at 7:16 a.m. People love family drama until it's there. Protect your peace. Survivor. Vanessa didn't tag Margaret. She didn't need to. The caption was paired with a close-up of Ryan, eyes downcast, taken during mediation. Cropped just enough to look tragic, just enough to invite sympathy. Margaret saw it over her tea. She didn't flinch, didn't even sigh. She tapped once, screenshotted it, saved it in the folder titled Narrative War, External Smears. At 9:03 a.m., she opened a blank post of her own. No filters, no shadows, no hashtags, just words. I'm not destroying a family. I'm defending elder rights, a forged power of attorney, a stolen stipend and a trespass caught on camera aren't misunderstandings, they're violations, and I won't apologize for protecting myself anymore. She clicked post. By noon her inbox was full, not with vitriol, but with breath, with relief. An email from a cousin she hadn't heard from in 3 years. Thank you for saying something. We always thought something was off. A Facebook message from a neighbor's daughter. My grandmother went through something similar. I believe you. Some came with long stories, others with 2 words. Keep going. One from her sister's old friend in Colorado, simply read, You're not alone. Margaret didn't cry, But she did sit very still for a long time, her palm flat on the table like grounding. By mid-afternoon, Ryan called. Not texted. Not emailed. She stared at his name before answering. "Hi," he said, his voice hoarse. "Mom." She waited. "I don't know what's happening. I thought I did, but I think I've been wrong." Her voice was steady. "About what?" "Everything," he said. "I saw the post. I read what you wrote. I started looking at the paperwork she said I signed. And I don't remember signing any of it." Margaret didn't speak. He continued. "Can I come over? I don't want to fight. I need to see it all." "Yes, but when you come, you'll be reading, not reacting." He agreed. She hung up, then called Carla. "I need your help with the paper trail." By 5 they were at the dining table, spreading everything across the lace runner Margaret once used for Thanksgiving. Receipts, PDFs, email, audio transcripts, date-stamped photos. They worked in quiet, Carla occasionally muttering, "Unreal," or "This is a full-time job." By nightfall everything was sorted by theme and timeline. Margaret labeled the boxes herself, each one crisp, legible. Medical misuse, forgery, social fabrication, witness silence. That night, Shay messaged her, the young woman who ran a community blog on elder rights. "Would you let me amplify this?" she wrote. "So many women go through this, but no one documents it like you have." Margaret stared at the blinking cursor, then typed back, "Let's talk next week." It was just past 10 p.m. when headlights cut across the driveway. Margaret stepped to the porch, cardigan draped across her shoulder. Ryan emerged from the car like someone carrying their own storm cloud. He didn't look angry. He looked undone. "I didn't sign the things they said I did," he said, without preamble. "The forms. The documents about your care. They weren't mine." Margaret didn't blink. She stepped aside, held out a folder. The tab was labeled signatures and soft copies. She didn't say "I told you so." She said, "Read carefully." Margaret hands him a folder, labeled signatures and soft copies. His name was there, but her pen stroke wasn't his. Ryan held the folder in both hands like it might burn him. The porch light cast soft shadows as he stepped inside. Margaret gestured toward the table where the evidence sat waiting. Quiet, unflinching, ready to speak where people hadn't. He didn't sit right away. He just opened the folder and stared. 2 documents, side by side. On the left, his known signature, mortgage papers, DMV forms. Even a birthday card he'd written for Margaret 2 years ago. On the right, a notarized caregiver application, permission to access Margaret's medical records, and a financial co-authorization. Every one of them bore his name, but not his hand. He ran a finger along the curve of the R. Then again. "This isn't me," he whispered. Margaret didn't answer. She didn't need to. He looked up, face pale. "She forged this." "She did," Margaret said softly. "I didn't even know she submitted anything. You weren't supposed to." Margaret replied, "That's what makes it forgery." He sank into the dining chair slowly, like gravity had suddenly remembered him. "I feel like a prop," he said. "Not a husband. Not a son. Just something convenient." Margaret didn't reach for him. She didn't rescue him from the weight. She let it land, because truth, when real, doesn't need soft lighting. "You can testify," she said. "The signature comparisons alone will raise flags." He nodded, eyes still fixed on the paper. "I will." She placed a smaller slip beside him. "This is from the handwriting analyst, unofficial but trained. They're willing to go formal if needed." Ryan read the note, then pressed his palms to his eyes. "I never wanted this." "I know," she said, "but truth isn't about wanting. It's forensic. It's the part of love that holds a magnifying glass." The silence between them was full, but not hostile, just real. Later that evening, as dusk soaked the sky in purples and bruised blue, Margaret's phone buzzed. Helen again. A new message. "Check the Ridgeview neighborhood page. It's spreading." Margaret opened Facebook. There it was. Vanessa. In full face. Lit gently from a ring light. Her voice syrupy. Her eyes misted. I moved in to help, not to harm. But some people see kindness as control. Some families punish love with paperwork. The caption read, "My side, my heart, my elder love, not litigation." The video had already been shared 142 times. Margaret set the phone down slowly. She didn't post, didn't respond, didn't blink. She walked to the drawer where her printed documents were labeled and sorted, checked their order, refreshed the backups on the external drive. Truth didn't need a filter. It needed a file path. Helen arrived half an hour later, holding a laptop and a printout. "I started something," she said, breathless. "A settlement support fund. Quiet for now. Legal fees. Reputation repair. Future protection initiatives." Margaret blinked, then nodded once. "Keep it off social. Private shares only. We don't fund truth with spectacle." Helen smiled. "Of course." Outside, a light wind passed through the garden wind chimes. Not quite music, but close. Margaret poured 2 cups of tea. "Next phase." Helen asked. Margaret looked toward the closed laptop screen, toward the image burned. There, Vanessa's face, soft lit, false. "No more answering," she said. "Only accounting." She stood to refill the kettle. Behind her, her phone buzzed again. She turned it over. A notification. "Vanessa Morgan has gone live. To those I hurt unintentionally." Margaret didn't open it, but she did whisper under her breath. "She's not sorry. She's setting stage lights." Vanessa releases a live apology video, claiming she moved in to help, not harm. She cried and explained, but never admitted. The video was 15 minutes long. Vanessa sat in front of a bay window, haloed in soft sunlight like a preacher's daughter on a soap opera. Her mascara was perfectly smudged, her voice a trembling whisper, just above a sigh. "This hasn't been easy," she began. "I've made mistakes. I see that now, but when you're doing your best and it's still not enough, sometimes you break. I moved in to help. I never wanted this war." Margaret watched from the kitchen table, laptop propped beside a pot of black tea. She didn't flinch, didn't scroll. She watched the whole performance through once, then hit replay. She muted the sound, studied the expressions. Vanessa's face twisted just so when she mentioned control. Her eyes dropped only when she said the word betrayal. Not once did she say the word forgery. Not once did she mention the stipend application, or the drawer, or the notarized lie. Helen entered halfway through the second viewing, scarf wrapped loose around her neck. "She say anything useful?" she asked. "No," Margaret murmured. She cried and explained, but never admitted. The social media reaction had split fast. The first wave was pity. "She looks fragile. We all make mistakes. Family is messy." But then came the questions, the comments asking for receipts, for dates, for evidence. "She's drowning in her own edits," Helen muttered, scrolling. Margaret turned to her phone. "Mark," she said when her lawyer picked up, "I need timestamps, legal ones, for everything. Document filings, notary dates, message metadata, everything we can verify." "I'll get my paralegal on it," he said. "But Margaret, I know," she said. "She's trying to make truth look like cruelty." Later that afternoon, Carla stopped by with a tote full of folders and a hard drive in a padded sleeve. "This," she said, "is the pen." Margaret blinked. "The audio one?" "Yup, it was still in the drawer. It caught almost 3 hours the day of mediation, including Vanessa's little bedroom rummage." Margaret took it carefully. The pen felt oddly weighty now. Carla continued, "We'll clean up the audio and isolate the key parts. I'll timestamp the moment she says I'll burn her down before I lose a dime." Margaret's mouth thinned. "That'll pair nicely with her 'I never wanted this' monologue." They spent the next 2 hours compiling paper files, voicemails, photographs, each labeled, each entered into a digital record. By dusk, the hearing packet was nearly done. Margaret stood by the dining table, holding the draft copy in her hands. It was thick now, real, like a spine for the truth she'd carried silently too long. "I want it bound," she said. Helen looked up. Like a book? Like a record, Margaret said. Because if I get hit by a bus tomorrow, this story still needs to be told. Outside, the sky was darkening into navy and bruised plum. Wind tapped the window. The house stood still, unshaken. Margaret's phone buzzed. It was Ryan. She answered on the second ring. Mom, his voice was uneven. She left. Margaret felt her stomach tighten, but kept her tone flat. What do you mean? I came home and her stuff was gone. Just gone. No note, no call. I tried her phone. Voicemail. Did she take anything? Just clothes, maybe a few documents. I don't know. She's just not here. He paused. She said something before she left. Something about restarting the narrative. Margaret closed her eyes. Of course she did. Ryan calls. She left, and he's unsure where she went. She vanished but left her story behind. The fax machine hummed faintly. A stack of papers, slotted into the tray. The kind marked police report, missing person, court filing, motion to revoke orders of protection. Vanessa Morgan had disappeared. Blocked family members, ceased communication. No goodbye, no call. Margaret read each statement carefully. Police confirmed Vanessa moved out abruptly. Changed her listed address. Revoked contact permissions. The court filings echoed it. Seals, serial numbers, signatures, not hers. She exhaled after reading. No triumph. Just calm. The next morning, sunlight peeled away the last shadows in Margaret's sunroom. She sat by the window in her usual chair, tea steaming gently on the side table. No anxieties pressed for space. Instead, a new quiet space, reclaimed. Helen arrived with 2 cups and a weathered notebook. She's gone, Helen said softly. Margaret nodded. She left. No call. No note. Just all of this written down. Helen glanced outside. You don't look relieved. I do, Margaret said. I'm just surprised. Peace feels like empty air. They sat quietly. Sunlight warmed Margaret's hand. Absence, she realized, could be the most powerful kind of closure. Her phone buzzed. Messages from estranged relatives who'd stayed silent while Vanessa posted her smears. Now they reached out. Are you okay? What can I do? We're here. Support she hadn't expected, swelled in small kindnesses. Emails, texts, quiet dinner invitations. People she didn't know sending notes of solidarity. Margaret kept responding, softly, gratefully. She'd always thought family meant proximity. Now she learned family could appear in absence, in recognition. That afternoon, Carla knocked on the door, carrying gently wrapped folders and flyers stamped Elder Right Support, Speaker Series. Would you consider sharing your story? Carla asked. Margaret turned the pages of one brochure. The words strength, awareness, survivor voices felt strange and necessary. I'm hesitant, Margaret said. But maybe it's time others heard this. Carla smiled. I can help you. No pressure, just truth. Margaret nodded. Not a performance, just presence. Later that evening, Ryan appeared in the sunroom doorway. He hesitated, glancing at Margaret's face. The tension between them had loosened. Less guilt, less shame, more clarity. He said quietly, Mom, can we sit? Margaret nodded, sliding her chair over. He sat beside her, not on the other side of the room as before. I'm sorry, he said, not for you, but for everything happened to me, for not asking sooner. They didn't speak long. They didn't fix the past. He reached for her hand. She gave it. That was enough. Twilight softened the garden outside. The wind chimes hummed a lullaby they hadn't heard in months. Margaret poured 2 cups of tea. Ryan cradled his mug tightly. Carla's earlier text popped up on her phone. You're going to open doors no one knew could close. Margaret put the phone down gently. She didn't look for Vanessa. She looked at the evidence files beside her. The recordings. The forgery proofs. The sworn statements. The packet she'd bound like armor. She closed her eyes, breathing in the hush. Support ground her. Solidarity steadied her. One woman's story, once silenced, now opened spaces for others. Just before she turned in, the mail arrived. A heavy envelope, certified. Vanessa's attorney, publishing a criminal allegation. Elder abuse, defamation, theft. Now criminal. Margaret's fingers rested on the seal without breaking it. Not fear. Steady resolve. Because the story wasn't over. It had just begun. Margaret receives a certified letter from Vanessa's attorney. She faces criminal investigation. She threatened criminal charges, so I came prepared. The envelope felt heavier than paper should. Margaret peeled it open at the kitchen counter, hands steady, glasses perched low on her nose. The first page bore her name in bold, followed by accusations like bruises, defamation, intentional emotional harm, financial retaliation. The language tried to sound clinical, but Margaret had seen enough medical records to know when someone was dressing a wound that hadn't been earned. Helen stood by the stove, pouring tea, her posture already tense. Margaret read aloud. In response to public statements that mischaracterize my client's intent, she stopped, laughed once, short and dry. She thinks malice can be trademarked. At 10 a.m., Margaret sat in Mark's office. The letter spread across the table like a threat they'd already outlived. It's a bluff, Mark said, flipping through the pages. Nothing in here suggests criminal weight, just noise, scare tactics. Margaret leaned back slightly. So we don't flinch. We counter, he said. If she wants to escalate, we set precedent. She nodded. File the countersuit. Elder financial abuse. Fraud. Forgery. Add the state documentation and the notarized witness from the care stipend. Mark's eyebrows rose slightly. You want to go public with it? Margaret didn't blink. Not yet. But soon. Back home, the printer hummed steadily. Ryan sat at the dining table, eyes fixed on the forms Mark had sent. Joint access removals, power of attorney revocations, retroactive disavowal of all signed permissions, tied to Vanessa's name. Every page, every one, Margaret said. He signed with a pen that didn't shake. Feels like erasing a decade, he said softly. Margaret looked at him for a long moment. Feels like correcting the record. That night, Margaret opened her laptop and composed a media draft. No poetry, no sentiment, just facts. I am responding to ongoing legal threats by submitting formal evidence of financial misrepresentation, forgery and coerced access to sensitive information. I will not speak to motive, only to proof. Elder abuse isn't always bruised. Sometimes it's bank codes, passwords and quiet violations, done in your name. She didn't add hashtags. She added timestamps. When she hit save, Helen handed her a thumb drive. This is the full archive. Duplicates uploaded, external backups created. Nothing gets lost now. Margaret smiled faintly. It's not about revenge anymore. It's about record keeping. At 6:47 p.m., Margaret emailed the statement to a short list of reporters. Not tabloids, not gossip column, just 3 journalists she remembered from community boards and long-form features. Women who'd written about silence, fraud, inheritance warfare, and what happens when women get erased one forgery at a time. She signed the message simply, Margaret Roth, willing to speak on the record. The next morning, her calendar pinged. One alert. Court date scheduled. Roth v. Morgan. Below it a list of recipients. Every family member was included. Margaret sat at her desk, fingers hovering over the keyboard, rereading the name of each person who would see the hearing date. Some hadn't called her in years. Some had already taken sides. All would now be witnesses, invited or not. She closed the laptop, then walked to her filing cabinet, unlocked it, and gently laid her hand on the bound folder labeled, Day of Reckoning, Verified Evidence. The clock ticked in quiet agreement. Court date appears on her calendar, and every family member is notified. They came expecting gossip. They stayed for a reckoning. Margaret stepped into the courtroom, like it belonged to no one, especially not to drama. Her navy suit was pressed, her binder firm in hand. She walked neither too fast nor too slow. No jewelry, no apology. The air shifted as she passed. Vanessa was already there, seated with her lawyer, who fidgeted with his notes. She looked thinner, like attention had started to weigh her down. She didn't meet Margaret's eyes. Not really, just flinched when their paths crossed. People leaned in, relatives, curious neighbors, a few reporters, but no one whispered. The judge entered, robes crisp, voice even. He asked for quiet. Then he looked directly at both parties and said, "We're here for truth, not tone." Vanessa's lawyer opened with an attempt at pathos, language dressed in soft suffering, words like disrespected, displaced, emotionally overwhelmed, but every sentence was a balloon with no string. They floated, not landed. Margaret sat motionless, hands folded. She didn't blink. When it was her turn, she rose. No notes, no hesitation. She stated each fact as if arranging stones in a garden path. "This is about paperwork," she said. "Signed without consent. Money moved without permission. Surveillance footage. Voicemail admissions. Recorded taunts. This isn't a feud. It's a file." Then she submitted the binder to the court clerk. Ryan testified next. His voice broke twice. But not from fear. From shame. She said, "I agreed to all of it. I didn't. I never even saw half those documents. That signature's not mine. It's close. But it isn't mine." The room tightened. Even Vanessa didn't object. Her fingers clutched her phone like it could erase everything with a swipe. The turning point came unexpectedly. A woman in her 70s stood from the gallery. Mrs. Whitaker. Margaret hadn't seen her in over a decade. "I'm sorry, Your Honor," she said, voice trembling. "But I have something to say. Vanessa has done this before. Not just to Margaret. I have old estate paperwork." Vanessa changed dates, shifted numbers. "My brother caught her back in 20. We let it go to avoid scandal. That was a mistake." The courtroom gasped. Not loudly, but collectively, like air was pulled from the room. Vanessa's attorney tried to pivot, blamed age, confusion, family dynamics, but the judge cut him off. "I have seen enough. We will recess. A ruling will follow tomorrow." He stood. Everyone else did too. Margaret didn't look back. She gathered her binder, clicked the latch shut, and walked down the center aisle. She passed Vanessa without a word, because no word was left that hadn't already been proven. Outside, the air was cool, sharp, the kind of air that cleans a room after someone opens a window. Margaret turned her face toward the breeze and whispered, "Let the records." The judge calls for a recess. Ruling imminent. Margaret arrived at the courthouse early. The air felt lighter than the day before. Expectant. Not heavy. She wore simple earrings now. Nothing flashy, as if any ornament distracts from just. Carla sat beside her, calm as ever. A single folder between them. They did not speak. They did not need to. When the judge re-entered the room, everyone rose. Vanessa looked smaller. Her lawyer glanced down at notes. Anxious. The judge folded his hand. "I hereby dismiss all claims made by Vanessa Morgan. Mrs. Roth's evidence is coherent, consistent, and compelling," he said. "I grant the injunction. Miss Morgan is permanently prohibited from entering or contacting Mrs. Roth, or her property. She is liable for financial damages as detailed in the countersuit." Silence filled the room before it exhaled. Margaret did not stand to celebrate. She didn't open her eyes wide. She simply closed them, breathed in and released. Vanessa's lips turned pale. Her eyes shut. The lawyer murmured protest, but the judge cut him off. "The record stands," he said. Court dismissed. In the hallway afterward, strangers nodded at Margaret. People who'd once avoided her now offered polite congratulations. She accepted each look with clarity, not relief. The peace wasn't triumph. It was resolution. Back home, Helen waited. When Margaret opened the front door, it was to laughter bubbling from the kitchen. Alex stood by the counter stirring soup. Ryan carried folded napkins. Carla was pouring wine. Margaret stepped in. "Dinner?" Alex asked quietly. "Yes," she said. "Dinner." They gathered at the table in the softly lit dining room. Margaret had cleared. No envelopes. No tension. Just green beans steaming, bread laid in wicker baskets, and voices that weren't rehearsed. Over soup, Ryan spoke first. "I'm sorry," he said. "For not listening. For believing what she scripted." His voice cracked, then steadied. "I won't lose you again." Margaret nodded. No tears came. Just acceptance. Alex looked at his mother. "Boundaries can feel harsh," but they're the deepest form of love. She smiled slowly. "Yes, Later, Helen gave Margaret a small frame. Inside, an empty supper-sized envelope. The same kind Vanessa had slid across the table that first evening, now stripped of meaning. The envelope lay flat and blank, held only by glass. A visual reclaiming of dignity. Helen's eyes glowed with pride. Margaret placed it on the shelf above the buffet, as though placing an exclamation mark on a sentence that had finally found its ending. Margaret didn't say much after that, just allowed the quiet warmth of kinship to settle around her. Alex cleared the dishes. Ryan folded napkins. They worked in sync, willingly, gently, real family habits, not performed ones. After dinner, Margaret stepped out onto her porch, dusk soft in the sky. The sold sign from the old house, propped against the wall inside, felt like history. The new view across her yard, maple trees, porch light glowing, felt like belonging. She cradled a cup of tea, inhaling the front door breeze. When she opened the door again, it was to warmth, not confrontation. Helen stood in the frame, offering another refill. Alex and Ryan exchanged quiet laughter inside. Margaret closed the door behind her, and leaned it into its latch. Nothing else needed opening. Margaret opens her front door this time, to warmth, not confrontation.